The scorching afternoon sun painted the asphalt in shimmering waves of heat as Jack Turner's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler. The highway stretched endlessly before him, a ribbon of black cutting through the desert landscape between Albuquerque and El Paso. This was his domain, his sanctuary, his life. For 23 years, he had called these roads home, and every mile marker, every curve, every rest stop held memories that only a true road warrior could understand. Jack's truck, a 2015 Peterbilt that had seen better days but never failed, rumbled steadily down the interstate. The cabin was his world, a carefully organized space where everything had its place. Photos of landscapes he'd captured during his travels were tucked into the visor. A small cactus plant sat secured on the dashboard, and his favorite coffee mug, chipped but cherished, rested in the cup holder. The radio played softly, a mix of classic rock and trucker talk that provided the soundtrack to his solitary existence. At 57, Jack had learned to appreciate the solitude that came with long-haul trucking. He'd never married, never had children, and rarely stayed in one place long enough to form lasting relationships. His life was measured in miles and deliveries, in sunrise coffee stops and midnight fuel runs. But today something felt different. There was an unusual restlessness in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite shake as he watched the desert scenery blur past his window. The CB radio crackled with the familiar chatter of fellow drivers sharing road conditions and weather updates. "Eastbound traffic looking clear past mile marker 187, came a gravelly voice. "Watch out for construction crews near the state line, good buddies." Jack adjusted his baseball cap and took a sip of lukewarm coffee, his eyes scanning the road ahead with the practiced vigilance of someone who had seen every possible hazard the highway could throw at him. As he crested a small hill, Jack's attention was caught by a figure on the roadside. About 200 yards ahead, someone was standing at the edge of the asphalt, thumb extended in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. Jack had picked up his share of stranded travelers over the years. It was an unwritten code among truckers to help those in need, but something about this particular figure made him slow down instinctively. It was a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, with long dark hair that whipped around her face in the desert wind. She wore faded jeans and a denim jacket despite the heat, and a worn backpack was slung over her shoulder. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Jack's attention. It was the way she stood. There was a tension in her posture, a wariness that spoke of someone who had learned not to trust easily. Her eyes darted between approaching vehicles with a mixture of hope and apprehension that tugged at something deep in Jack's chest. As his truck approached, their eyes met through the windshield. Hers were striking, a deep green that seemed to hold secrets and sorrows beyond her years. For a moment that felt frozen in time, Jack saw something in those eyes that reminded him of a wounded animal, simultaneously desperate for help and terrified of human contact. Without fully understanding why, he found himself applying the air brakes, the massive truck slowing with a pneumatic hiss that echoed across the empty landscape. The woman approached cautiously, her grip tight on the backpack strap. Jack rolled down the passenger window and leaned across the cab. "Where you headed, miss?" he called out, his voice carrying the gentle drawl of someone who had spent decades conversing with strangers. "El Paso," she replied, her voice barely audible over the idling engine. There was something musical about her accent, possibly East Coast, but Jack couldn't place it exactly. "I can pay for gas," she added quickly, as if anticipating rejection. Jack studied her for a moment. His years on the road had taught him to read people quickly, and while he sensed she was hiding something, he didn't detect any immediate danger. More than that, there was something vulnerable about her that awakened his protective instincts. "No need for that," he said, reaching across to unlock the passenger door. "Hop in, I'm going that way anyway." She climbed into the cab with fluid grace, settling into the passenger seat with her backpack clutched protectively against her chest. Jack noticed she kept glancing in the side mirror, as if checking to see if anyone was following them. "Name's Jack Turner," he said, extending his right hand while keeping his left on the wheel. "Emily," she replied after a brief hesitation, shaking his hand with surprising firmness. "Emily Davis." The pause before her last name was almost imperceptible, but Jack caught it. He had learned long ago that the road attracted people running from something, and everyone deserved their secrets. As they merged back onto the highway, Jack tried to engage her in conversation, but Emily's responses were brief and guarded. She spoke in fragments. Yes, she had traveled this route before. No, she didn't have family in El Paso. She was just passing through. Her fingers drummed nervously on the backpack, and Jack noticed she never fully relaxed into the seat, maintaining a posture that suggested she was ready to bolt at any moment. The miles passed in relative silence, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the occasional crackle of the CB radio. Jack found himself stealing glances at his passenger, trying to piece together the puzzle she represented. There were small details that didn't quite fit: the expensive watch on her wrist that contrasted with her worn clothing, the way she flinched when a motorcycle roared past them, the careful way she avoided looking directly at other vehicles on the road. About an hour into their journey, they passed a rest area, and Emily suddenly straightened in her seat. "Could we stop?" she asked, her voice tight with tension. I just need a few minutes." Jack pulled into the rest area, a modest facility with a few picnic tables and basic amenities surrounded by scrub brush and desert landscape. Emily was out of the truck almost before it came to a complete stop, her backpack still clutched tightly as she hurried toward the restroom facilities. Jack watched her go, noting the way she moved, quick, purposeful, but constantly aware of her surroundings. While she was gone, Jack stepped out to stretch his legs and check his tires, a routine that was second nature after so many years. The desert air was dry and warm, carrying the scent of sage and dust. As he walked around his truck, he noticed a dark sedan parked at the far end of the rest area. The driver remained behind the wheel, windows tinted too dark to see inside. Something about the vehicle made Jack uncomfortable, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what. When Emily returned, she seemed more composed, but somehow more fragile at the same time. As they prepared to leave, Jack noticed her glance toward the sedan. For just a moment, her face went completely pale, and she quickly looked away. "We should go," she said quietly, already climbing back into the truck. As they pulled out of the rest area, Jack watched in his mirrors. The sedan remained parked for several more seconds before slowly following them back onto the highway, maintaining a careful distance. Emily had noticed too. He could see her watching the passenger mirror with growing anxiety. "Everything okay?" Jack asked gently, not wanting to spook her but concerned about the obvious distress she was experiencing. Emily was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Yes," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. I just want to get to El Paso as soon as possible." Jack nodded, sensing that pushing for more information would only make her more uncomfortable. But as the miles ticked by and the sedan continued to follow at a distance, he began to realize that his simple act of kindness in picking up a hitchhiker might have drawn him into something far more complicated than he had bargained for. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. But the beauty of the landscape couldn't shake the growing feeling that their journey was about to take an unexpected and potentially dangerous turn. Chapter 2: Shadows on the Road. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The tension in the truck cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife as Jack maintained his steady speed down the interstate. The dark sedan had been following them for over 30 miles now, sometimes dropping back until it was barely visible, other times closing the distance just enough to remind them of its presence. Emily had stopped pretending she wasn't aware of it, her eyes constantly flicking between the passenger mirror and the road ahead. Jack's years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every instinct was screaming that something was very wrong. He had dealt with aggressive drivers, road rage incidents, and even the occasional criminal on the run. But this felt different. This felt personal, and it involved the frightened young woman sitting beside him. "Emily," he said gently, his voice cutting through the silence that had settled between them like a heavy blanket. "I think it's time you told me what's really going on." She turned to look at him, and for the first time since she'd gotten into his truck, he saw her guard drop completely. Her green eyes were filled with a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and something else, shame perhaps, or regret. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she whispered, her voice so quiet he had to strain to hear her over the engine noise. "Try me," Jack replied, adjusting his grip on the steering wheel. "I've been driving these roads for over 2 decades. I've seen just about everything there is to see, and I've learned not to judge people based on their worst moments." Emily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers working nervously at the zipper of her backpack. When she finally spoke, her words came out in a rush, as if she was afraid that if she stopped, she wouldn't be able to start again. "My real name is Emily Patterson, and 3 months ago I made the biggest mistake of my life." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I was working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm in Santa Fe. Nothing glamorous, but it was honest work and I was good at it. I had a quiet life, a small apartment, a few friends. I thought I was happy." Jack remained silent, sensing that interrupting would cause her to retreat back into her shell. "Then I met David Rodriguez," she continued, her voice taking on a bitter edge. "He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted in a man. He owned several businesses around the city, restaurants, a small construction company, even a car dealership. He swept me off my feet with expensive dinners, weekend trips, gifts I couldn't afford on my salary." The sedan behind them had closed the distance again, and Emily's voice became more strained as she noticed it in the mirror. "It took me weeks to realize that David's businesses were just fronts. He was involved in activities that I didn't want to know about. Money laundering mostly, but other things too. By the time I figured it out, I was already in too deep. He had convinced me to help with some of his legitimate bookkeeping, but I was actually helping him clean money from his illegal operations." Jack felt his jaw tighten. He had suspected Emily was running from something, but hearing the details made it real in a way that was both frightening and heartbreaking. "When I tried to break up with him, he told me I knew too much to just walk away. He had evidence of my involvement, documents with my signature, bank records, even photos of me at meetings I thought were innocent business dinners." Emily's voice cracked slightly. "He said if I ever tried to leave him or go to the police, he would make sure I went down with him. And he had enough connections to make sure that happened." The truck crested a small hill, and Jack could see a gas station about 2 miles ahead. He made a mental note of it. They would need fuel soon, and it might provide an opportunity to lose their tail or at least get a better look at who was following them. "So what changed?" Jack asked. "What made you finally run?" Emily's hands tightened on her backpack, and Jack noticed for the first time that it seemed unusually heavy for its size. "Last week, David asked me to do something that crossed a line I couldn't uncross. He wanted me to set up accounts for moving money that came from hurting people, really hurting them. I couldn't do it, Jack. I couldn't be part of that." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, unfolding it with trembling fingers. "So I took this," she said, showing him what appeared to be a list of names, dates, and amounts. "It's a record of every transaction I helped process, every account I helped create. It's enough evidence to put David and his associates away for a very long time." Jack glanced at the paper, his mind racing. "And that's what's in the backpack?" "More documents, flash drives, bank statements, everything I could gather before I ran." Emily folded the paper and put it back in her pocket. "I was going to take it to the FBI office in El Paso, but David's people found me before I could get there the first time. I've been running for 3 days now, trying to stay ahead of them." The gas station was getting closer, and Jack could see that the sedan was maintaining its distance. "Why didn't you go to the local police in Santa Fe?" Emily's laugh was bitter and humorless. "Because David has friends everywhere. The day I decided to run, I overheard him on the phone with someone he called Lieutenant Martinez. They were discussing how to handle the Emily situation if it became necessary. I realized then that I couldn't trust anyone in law enforcement, at least not locally." Jack felt a surge of anger on her behalf. The idea that someone could be so trapped, so isolated, reminded him of why he had always preferred the open road to the complications of city life. but it also awakened something protective in him that he hadn't felt in years. "The man in the sedan," he said. "You recognize him?" "I think so. His name is Carlos, and he works for David. He's the one who usually handles problems that need to disappear." Emily's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Jack, I'm so sorry I got you involved in this. I should have been honest with you from the beginning." "Don't apologize for asking for help," Jack replied firmly. "That's what decent people do. They help each other when they can." As they approached the gas station, Jack made a decision. He had contacts in the trucking community, people who had been on the road as long as he had, and understood the importance of looking out for each other. More importantly, he had a cousin who worked for the state police, someone who might be able to help Emily get her evidence to the right people without it disappearing into the wrong hands. "Emily," he said, "I want you to trust me. I have an idea, but it's going to require you to be brave for just a little bit longer." She looked at him with those green eyes that had first caught his attention, and he saw something new in them. Hope, fragile and tentative, but real nonetheless. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. As Jack signaled to exit at the gas station, he began to outline his plan, hoping that his years of experience reading people and situations would be enough to keep them both safe and get Emily the help she desperately needed. Chapter. The plan unfolds. Jack pulled his 18-wheeler into the gas station with the practiced ease of someone who had performed this maneuver thousands of times. The facility was typical of those found along major highways: a few fuel pumps, a convenience store with fluorescent lighting that buzzed like angry insects, and a small restaurant that promised home cooking on a faded sign. More importantly, for Jack's purposes, it had multiple exit points and enough truck traffic to provide cover for what he was planning. As he positioned the truck at the diesel pumps, Jack kept one eye on the rearview mirror. The dark sedan had pulled into the parking area near the convenience store, positioning itself with a clear view of Jack's truck. The driver remained behind the wheel, but Jack could make out the silhouette of a large man who seemed to be speaking into a cell phone. "Okay, Emily, here's what we're going to do," Jack said, his voice calm and steady, despite the gravity of their situation. "I'm going to get out and start fueling up nice and normal. You're going to slide over to the driver's seat and wait for my signal. When I give you the thumbs up, you drive straight to the truck stop about 2 miles east of here, Big Eddie's Travel Plaza. You can't miss it. There's a giant neon sign with a cowboy on it." Emily's eyes widened with alarm. "Jack, I can't drive your truck. I don't even have a CDL, and this thing is enormous." "You don't need to be perfect, just good enough to get there safely," Jack replied, pulling a business card from his wallet. "When you get to Big Eddie's, ask for Manny Rodriguez at the service desk. Tell him Jack Turner sent you and that you need to use the family phone. He'll know what that means." "Family phone?" Emily asked, confusion evident in her voice. "It's a secure line that connects to my cousin Danny's direct number at the state police barracks. Danny's been on the force for 15 years, and more importantly, he's not connected to anyone in Santa Fe. You can trust him with your evidence." Emily took the business card with trembling fingers. "But what about you? What happens when Carlos realizes I'm not in the truck anymore?" Jack's smile was grim but determined. "That's where it gets interesting. I'm going to take a little detour, lead our friend on a wild goose chase through some back roads I know like the back of my hand. By the time he figures out you're not with me anymore, you'll be safe at the state police barracks with Danny." "Jack, this is too dangerous. You don't know what Carlos is capable of." "Emily," Jack interrupted gently, "I've been taking care of myself on these roads for over 20 years. Trust me when I say I know how to handle myself." He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a CB radio, handing it to her. "This is set to channel 19. If you run into any trouble, key the mic and say Breaker 109. This is Emily looking for Road Dog Jack. Every trucker within 50 miles will hear you and they'll come running. We take care of our own out here." Emily clutched the radio to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. "Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me." Jack was quiet for a moment, his weathered hands resting on the steering wheel as he considered her question. Because 25 years ago I had a little sister who got mixed up with the wrong crowd. She tried to do the right thing, tried to get out, but nobody would help her. Nobody would listen. His voice grew thick with emotion. She didn't make it, Emily, but maybe, just maybe, I can make sure you do. The weight of his words settled between them like a sacred vow. Emily reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Jack nodded and opened his door. "Remember, wait for my signal, then drive straight to Big Eddie's. And Emily, don't look back." As Jack stepped out of the truck and walked toward the fuel pumps, he forced himself to move with casual confidence. He could feel Carlos watching him from the sedan, and he knew that the next few minutes would determine whether his plan succeeded or failed spectacularly. Jack began the familiar routine of fueling his truck, but his mind was racing through every detail of his plan. The back roads he intended to use were treacherous, especially for someone unfamiliar with them. There were hairpin turns, steep grades, and sections where the pavement gave way to gravel. If Carlos was foolish enough to follow him there, Jack would have every advantage. While the diesel flowed into his tank, Jack casually walked to the convenience store, making sure to pass close enough to the sedan to get a better look at its occupant. Carlos was indeed a large man, probably in his 30s, with the kind of build that suggested he spent time in the gym. His face was scarred along the left cheek, and his eyes followed Jack's every movement with predatory intensity. Inside the store, Jack purchased a cup of coffee and a road atlas, taking his time to appear as normal as possible. The teenage clerk barely looked up from his magazine, and Jack was grateful for the kid's disinterest. At the counter, he also bought a prepaid cell phone, something that might prove useful if his plan went sideways. When Jack returned to his truck, he could see Emily in the passenger seat, her knuckles white as she gripped the CB radio. She had moved the backpack to the floor, but kept one foot protectively positioned near it. Jack gave her what he hoped was a reassuring smile and continued with his refueling. As he hung up the diesel nozzle, Jack caught sight of another vehicle pulling into the gas station, a black SUV with tinted windows that parked near the restaurant entrance. Two men got out, both wearing dark clothing and sunglasses despite the approaching evening. Jack's blood ran cold as he realized that Carlos hadn't been working alone. Time was running out faster than he had anticipated. Jack quickly finished securing the fuel cap and walked around to the driver's side of his truck. As he passed the passenger window, he made eye contact with Emily and gave her a slight nod. Not the thumbs up they had agreed on, but a warning that the situation had changed. Jack climbed into the driver's seat and leaned close to Emily. "There are more of them now," he whispered. "Two more men just arrived in a black SUV. We need to move fast." Emily's face went pale, but she nodded with determination. "What do we do?" "Same plan, but faster. As soon as I drive out of here, you slide over and follow the directions I gave you. Don't stop for anything or anyone until you reach Big Eddie's." Jack started the engine, the powerful diesel rumbling to life with a sound that seemed to announce their intentions to everyone within a quarter-mile radius. As he pulled away from the pumps, he saw in his mirrors that both the sedan and the SUV were preparing to follow. "Get ready," he told Emily, his hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. They had traveled less than a mile when Jack spotted what he was looking for. A truck stop with multiple 18-wheelers parked in the lot, their drivers likely taking their mandatory rest breaks. Perfect cover for what he had in mind. "This is it," Jack said, pulling into the truck stop and positioning his rig between two other large trucks. "Remember, straight to Big Eddie's. Ask for Manny. Use the family phone to call Danny. Can you do this?" Emily nodded, her jaw set with newfound resolve. "I can do this." As Jack stepped out of the truck for the second time that day, he knew he was about to put everything on the line for a woman he had known for less than 6 hours. But sometimes, he reflected, the most important decisions were the ones that didn't require thinking, they required heart. Chapter 4. The chase begins. The moment of truth had arrived. Jack stood beside his truck in the crowded parking lot, watching as Emily slid behind the wheel with determined but shaky movements. Her hands found the steering wheel, and she adjusted the mirrors with the quick efficiency of someone who knew her life depended on getting this right. Through the windshield, their eyes met one final time, and Jack saw something that made his chest tighten with pride. Emily Patterson was no longer the frightened woman he had picked up on the roadside. She was a survivor, ready to fight for her freedom. Jack raised his hand in a casual wave, the signal they had agreed upon, and Emily slowly pulled the massive truck out of the parking space. He watched as she navigated between the other vehicles with surprising skill, her movements careful but confident. The 18-wheeler disappeared into the flow of highway traffic, carrying with it his hopes for her safety and the evidence that could bring down David Rodriguez's entire operation. Now came the dangerous part of his plan. Jack walked casually toward the truck stop's diner, keeping his movements natural while scanning the parking lot for his pursuers. He didn't have to look long. The dark sedan was positioned near the entrance, and he could see Carlos behind the wheel. His attention focused on the highway where Emily's truck had just merged into traffic. The black SUV was parked closer to the fuel pumps, its occupants nowhere to be seen, which made Jack more nervous than if he could see them clearly. Jack entered the diner and took a seat at the counter with a clear view of the parking lot. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and tired feet, poured him coffee without being asked. "You look like you could use this, honey," she said with a maternal smile. "Thank you, ma'am," Jack replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. He checked his watch. Emily should reach Big Eddie's in about 20 minutes if she maintained a steady speed and didn't encounter any problems. He needed to give her that time before he made his move. Through the diner window, Jack watched as Carlos got out of the sedan and walked toward the restaurant. The man moved with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating others, his eyes scanning the interior as he approached. Jack turned slightly on his stool, presenting his profile while keeping Carlos in his peripheral vision. Carlos entered the diner and took a booth near the back, positioning himself where he could watch both the entrance and the parking lot. He ordered coffee and a piece of pie, settling in like a man prepared to wait. Jack realized that Carlos was smarter than he had hoped. He wasn't just blindly following vehicles, he was watching and waiting to see what Jack would do next. Next 15 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Jack nursed his coffee and made small talk with the waitress, all while keeping track of Carlos's position and watching for any sign of the men from the black SUV. His plan had been to lead Carlos on a chase through the back roads, but now he realized that his pursuer was too experienced to be easily fooled. When Jack's phone buzzed with a text message, he nearly jumped out of his skin. The message was from a number he didn't recognize. "Package delivered safely, thank you, honey." Emily had made it to Big Eddie's and successfully contacted his cousin Danny. Relief flooded through Jack like a physical force, followed immediately by a new determination to ensure that Carlos and his associates never got close to her again. Jack stood up from the counter, left money for his coffee, plus a generous tip, and walked toward the exit. He could feel Carlos watching him, and he made sure his movements appeared casual and unhurried. Outside, he headed toward the truck rental area where several vehicles were available for short-term use. If Carlos wanted to follow him, Jack would give him something to chase. The rental process took longer than Jack would have liked, but eventually he was behind the wheel of a pickup truck, heading back toward the highway. In his rearview mirror, he could see Carlos's sedan pulling out of the truck stop parking lot. The black SUV was nowhere to be seen, which worried Jack more than he cared to admit. Were they following Emily, or were they planning something else entirely? As Jack merged onto the highway, he deliberately took the exit for the old state route that wound through the mountains, a road he knew like his own heartbeat, but that would be treacherous for someone unfamiliar with its twists and turns. Carlos followed at a discreet distance, apparently content to shadow Jack rather than force a confrontation in broad daylight. The mountain road was exactly as Jack remembered it. Narrow, winding, with steep drop-offs and spectacular views that tourists loved and truckers avoided. He pushed the rental pickup harder than was probably safe, using his knowledge of every curve and straight stretch to gradually increase the distance between himself and his pursuer. After an hour of driving through increasingly remote terrain, Jack's phone rang. The display showed Danny's number and Jack answered immediately. "Jack, where the hell are you?" Danny's voice was tight with concern. "Emily made it here safe, and I've got her evidence secured, but she's worried sick about you. She says there are dangerous people looking for both of you. I'm fine, Danny, but I'm being followed by at least one of them. I'm leading him away from Emily and toward the old mining roads up in the mountains. How's she doing? She's tough. I'll give her that. The evidence she brought is solid gold, Jack. We're talking about federal charges that could put a lot of bad people away for a very long time. But right now, I'm more concerned about getting you somewhere safe. Jack glanced. In his rear view mirror and saw that Carlos's sedan was still following, though the distance between them had increased significantly. I've got an idea, but I'm going to need some backup. Can you get a couple of units up to the old Copper Creek Mine Road? There's only one way in and one way out, and I think it's time we had a conversation with Mr. Carlos. Jack, don't do anything stupid. These people have already shown they're willing to use violence. I'm not planning to do anything stupid, Jack replied, turning onto a dirt road that led deeper into the mountains. But I am planning to do something that will make sure Emily can sleep safely tonight. As he drove toward the abandoned mine, Jack thought about Emily's courage in trusting him with her story and her evidence. She had risked everything to do the right thing, and now it was his turn to make sure that courage wasn't wasted. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountain peaks, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. It would be dark. Soon, and in the darkness, Jack would have every advantage he needed. Behind him, Carlos's sedan continued to follow, unaware that he was being led into a trap that had been 23 years in the making. Jack had spent his entire adult life learning these roads, understanding their moods and secrets. Tonight, that knowledge would serve a purpose he had never imagined when he first started driving trucks, protecting an innocent woman who had trusted him with her life. The old mine was still 5 miles ahead, and Jack settled in for the final phase of his plan, knowing that the next hour would determine whether Emily Patterson would finally be free to reclaim her life. Chapter 5. Into the mountains. The dirt road to Copper Creek Mine wound through the mountains like a scar carved into the earth by decades of mining trucks and heavy equipment. Jack's rental pickup bounced and lurched over ruts and rocks, its headlights cutting through the gathering darkness as he climbed higher into the remote wilderness. In his rearview mirror, he could still see the occasional flash of Carlos's headlights, though the distance between them had grown considerably as the sedan struggled with the rough terrain. Jack's phone buzzed with another call from Danny. "Jack, I've got 2 units heading up the mountain road, but it's going to take them at least 40 minutes to reach the mine. Are you sure about this plan?" "As sure as I can be," Jack replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter as he navigated a particularly treacherous curve. "This guy has been following us all day and I'm tired of running. It's time to end this." "What about the other vehicle Emily mentioned? The black SUV?" Jack had been wondering about that himself. The SUV had disappeared from the truck stop, and he hadn't seen any sign of it since. "I'm hoping they went back to report to David that they lost us, but keep Emily close just in case." "She's not going anywhere. I've got her in protective custody, and she's already given her statement to the federal agents who just arrived. Jack, what she's given us is going to bring down a major money laundering operation. We're talking about millions of dollars and connections that reach into several states." The news should have made Jack feel relieved, but as he pulled into the clearing around the abandoned Copper Creek mine, all he felt was a grim determination to ensure that Carlos would never pose a threat to Emily again. The mine had been closed for over 15 years, leaving behind a collection of rusted equipment, abandoned buildings, and dangerous mine shafts that were fenced off with warning signs. Jack parked his pickup near the old mining office, a sturdy, concrete building that had weathered decades of mountain storms. He got out of the truck and took a moment to orient himself in the darkness. The mine site was exactly as he remembered it from his occasional hunting trips to the area, isolated, with only one road in and out, and plenty of places where a man could position himself strategically. The sound of an approaching engine echoed through the mountain air, and Jack could see headlights making their way up the winding road. Carlos had taken the bait and followed him into what was essentially a dead end. Jack smiled grimly and moved toward the mining office, where he positioned himself with a clear view of the road, while remaining hidden in the shadows. Carlos's sedan emerged into the clearing slowly, the driver clearly wary of the unfamiliar terrain. The car stopped about 50 yards from Jack's position, and for several long moments nothing happened. Jack could imagine Carlos sitting behind the wheel, trying to decide whether this was a trap or simply the end of a chase that had led nowhere. Useful. Finally, the sedan's door opened and Carlos stepped out. Even in the darkness, Jack could see that the man was armed. There was a telltale bulge under his jacket that spoke of someone prepared for violence. Carlos moved cautiously toward Jack's abandoned pickup, using the vehicle's frame for cover as he approached. "I know you're out there, old man," Carlos called out, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "Why don't you come out and we can have a civilized conversation?" Jack remained silent, watching as Carlos circled the pickup truck with professional precision. The man was clearly experienced in this type of confrontation, but he was also operating in unfamiliar territory, which gave Jack a significant advantage. "You picked up something that doesn't belong to you," Carlos continued, his tone conversational but with an underlying threat that made Jack's skin crawl. "My employer is willing to be reasonable about this. Just tell me where the girl is and you can walk away from this. No harm, no foul." Jack's anger flared at the casual way Carlos referred to Emily as something rather than someone. This man represented everything that was wrong with David Rodriguez's organization, the willingness to treat human beings as disposable objects in their pursuit of profit and power. "She's not a thing," Jack called out from his position near the mining office. "She's a human being who deserves to live her life without looking over her shoulder." Carlos immediately turned toward the sound of Jack's voice, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. "There you are. I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost in these mountains." "I know these mountains better than you know your own neighborhood," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "The question is, what are you planning to do about it?" "That depends on you, old man. Are you going to be smart about this, or do I have to make this difficult?" Jack could hear the sound of approaching vehicles in the distance. Danny's backup units were making their way up the mountain road. He just needed to keep Carlos talking for a few more minutes until help arrived. "You know what I think?" Jack said, moving slightly to maintain his concealment while keeping Carlos in sight. "I think you're scared. You've been chasing shadows all day, and now you're stuck on a mountain with no backup and no easy way out." Carlos laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You think those police sirens I hear coming up the mountain are going to save you? You have no idea who you're dealing with. David Rodriguez has friends in places you can't imagine." "Maybe so," Jack admitted, "but he doesn't have friends up here. This is my territory, and you're trespassing." The sound of the approaching police units was getting louder, and Jack could see that Carlos was becoming increasingly agitated. The man began pacing back and forth near the pickup truck, his head constantly turning between the road and Jack's general location. "Last chance, old man," Carlos shouted. "Tell me where the girl is, or I start making this personal." "It's already personal," Jack replied. "You made it personal the moment you started hunting an innocent woman who was just trying to do the right thing." Carlos suddenly stopped pacing and drew his weapon, a pistol that gleamed dully in the moonlight. "Wrong answer," he said, and began moving deliberately toward the mining office. Jack's heart rate spiked as he realized that the confrontation was about to become physical. He had been in his share of fights over the years, but never against an armed man with professional training. The sound of the police sirens was getting closer, but they still weren't close enough. As Carlos approached the mining office, Jack made a decision that would have seemed crazy to anyone else, but made perfect sense to a man who had spent his life taking calculated risks on dangerous roads. He stepped out of the shadows, his hands raised, but his stance confident. "I'm right here," he said calmly. "But before you do something you can't take back, you should know that Emily Patterson is already in federal protective custody, and everything she knows about David Rodriguez's operation is now in the hands of the FBI." Carlos froze, his weapon still pointed at Jack, but his expression shifting from confident aggression to something that looked like panic. "You're lying." "Am I?" Jack asked, pulling out his cell phone with one hand while keeping the other raised. Would you like to call David and ask him how his day is going?" The sound of the police siren suddenly became much louder, and the first set of headlights appeared at the bottom of the access road. Carlos looked back and forth between Jack and the approaching vehicles, his face twisted with indecision and growing desperation. In that moment of hesitation, Jack realized that the most dangerous part of their confrontation was just beginning. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The police vehicles burst into the clearing with their sirens wailing and lights flashing, creating a chaotic symphony of red and blue that illuminated the abandoned mine site like a surreal carnival. Carlos spun around, his weapon still drawn, caught between Jack and the approaching officers. His face was a mask of desperation and rage as he realized that his carefully planned pursuit had led him into a trap from which there might be no escape. "Drop your weapon," came the amplified voice from one of the police cars. "This is the state police. Drop your weapon and get on the ground." Carlos's eyes darted wildly between Jack and the police vehicles, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. Jack could see the man's internal struggle playing out in real time, the professional criminal warring with the desperate fugitive who knew his world was collapsing around him. "It's over, Carlos," Jack said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos of sirens and shouted commands. "Put the gun down and maybe you'll live to see tomorrow." "You don't understand," Carlos replied, his voice cracking with strain. "If I go back empty-handed, if I can't deliver the girl, or at least you, David will have me eliminated. I'm a loose end now, just like she was." Jack took a careful step forward, his hands still raised. "Then this is your chance to make a different choice. Help the authorities bring David down, and maybe they can protect you too." Carlos laughed bitterly. "Protect me? You think witness protection works against someone like David Rodriguez? He has connections everywhere, police, judges, federal agents. There's nowhere I could hide that he wouldn't eventually find me." The police officers had taken positions behind their vehicles, their weapons drawn but holding fire, as long as Jack remained in the line of potential crossfire. Danny's voice came over a megaphone. "Carlos Mendez, this is Detective Danny Turner with the state police. We know about your involvement with David Rodriguez's organization. If you surrender peacefully, we can work something out." At the mention of his full name, Carlos's face went white. "How do they know my name?" he muttered, more to himself than to Jack. Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. There was something in Carlos's reaction that didn't fit with what he knew about the situation. Emily had mentioned Carlos as one of David's enforcers, but she had never indicated that he was anything more than hired muscle. The way he was reacting to having his identity known suggested something deeper. "Carlos," Jack said slowly, "who are you really working for?" Carlos's laugh was hollow and filled with self-loathing. "You want to know the truth, old man? You really want to know why I've been chasing you and that girl across half the state?" "Tell me," Jack replied, sensing that they were about to reach the heart of whatever conspiracy had engulfed Emily's life. "My real name is Carlos Mendez Rodriguez," Carlos said, lowering his weapon slightly. "David Rodriguez is my brother." The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. Everything suddenly made sense. Carlos's persistence in following them, his intimate knowledge of David's operations, his desperation to retrieve Emily and her evidence. This wasn't just about a criminal organization protecting its secrets. This was about family loyalty and blood ties that ran deeper than any professional relationship. "Emily doesn't know, does she?" Jack asked. "Of course she doesn't know," Carlos spat. "She thinks I'm just another hired thug. She has no idea that everything she's planning to reveal to the FBI will destroy my family, will send my brother to prison for the rest of his life." Jack's mind raced as he processed this new information. "But you've been helping him launder money, helping him hurt people. Surely you knew this day would come eventually." Carlos's face contorted with anguish. "I never wanted any part of this. David dragged me into his business when I was barely 18 years old. He said it was temporary, just until he could get established legitimately. That was 15 years ago, and every year the operations got bigger, more dangerous, more violent." The police officers were growing restless, and Jack could hear Danny calling for a negotiator over the radio. Time was running out for any kind of peaceful resolution. "So why not just let Emily go?" Jack asked. "Why not let her bring David down and free yourself from all of this?" "Because he's still my brother," Carlos shouted, his voice echoing off the mountain walls. "Because despite everything he's done, everything he's become, I can't be the one responsible for putting him behind bars forever. And because..." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Because I'm in too deep myself. The things I've done for David, the people I've hurt to protect his operations, I'm just as guilty as he is." Jack felt a surge of sympathy for the tortured man standing before him. Carlos wasn't evil in the way that David apparently was. He was trapped by loyalty and circumstances that had spiraled far beyond his control. "Carlos, listen to me," Jack said urgently. "Emily didn't ask for any of this. She was just trying to live an honest life when your brother pulled her into his world. She doesn't deserve to pay the price for choices she never made." "I know that," Carlos replied, his weapon now pointing at the ground. "Don't you think I know that? Every mile I've followed you today, I've been hoping you'd get away. I've been hoping she'd make it to safety and I could go back to David and tell him I lost the trail." "Then why are you here? Why did you follow us to the end?" Carlos looked up at Jack with eyes that held a lifetime of regret. "Because David is my brother. And because if I don't bring something back to him, her, you, the evidence, something, he won't just eliminate me. He'll go after my sister Maria and her children. They live in Tucson and they don't even know about David's real business. He'll hurt innocent people to punish me for failing him." The complexity of the situation suddenly became clear to Jack. This wasn't a simple story of good versus evil. It was a tragedy of family loyalty, misplaced protection, and the impossible. Choices that people make when they're trapped between love and survival. "Carlos," Jack said gently, "there's another way. Help us bring David down properly. Testify against him, and the authorities can protect your sister and her family. But that only works if you make the right choice tonight." Carlos raised his head and looked directly at Jack. For the first time, since their confrontation began, his eyes held something that looked like hope. "You think they'd really protect Maria and the kids?" "Danny," Jack called out without taking his eyes off Carlos, "if Carlos cooperates fully, can you guarantee protection for his family in Tucson?" Danny's voice came back over the megaphone. "If he provides testimony that leads to David Rodriguez's conviction, we can arrange federal protection for his immediate family members." Carlos stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of the decision visible in every line of his body. Finally, he set his weapon on the ground and raised his hands. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, let's end this." As the police officers moved in to secure Carlos and the scene, Jack felt a profound sense of relief wash over him. Emily was safe, her evidence was in the right hands, and now they had a witness who could provide the inside information needed to dismantle David Rodriguez's entire operation. But even as the immediate crisis resolved itself, Jack knew that the real work was just beginning. Emily would need to testify. Carlos would need to be protected while providing his evidence, and somewhere in Santa Fe, David Rodriguez was probably just learning that his carefully constructed criminal empire was about to come crashing down around him. Chapter 7. New Beginnings. 3 months later, Jack Turner sat in the witness waiting room of the federal courthouse in Albuquerque, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. He had never been comfortable in formal clothing, preferring the practical comfort of his trucker's uniform to the stiff constraints of a suit and tie. But today was different. Today was the day that David Rodriguez would finally face justice for the crimes that had terrorized Emily Patterson and countless others. Through the window, Jack could see Emily approaching the courthouse steps, flanked by 2 federal marshals who'd been assigned to her protection detail. Even from a distance, he could see that she had changed dramatically from the frightened woman he had picked up on the roadside that scorching afternoon. Her shoulders were straight, her step confident, and there was a determination in her posture that spoke of someone who had found her inner strength and refused to let anyone take it away again. Emily entered the waiting room a few minutes later, and Jack stood to greet her. She looked professional in a navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a simple but elegant style, but it was her eyes that showed the most dramatic change. Where once there had been fear and desperation, now there was calm resolve and something that looked very much like peace. "Jack," she said, embracing him warmly, "I can't believe this day is finally here." "How are you holding up?" he asked, studying her face with the concern of someone who had become genuinely invested in her well-being. "I'm nervous," Emily admitted, "but I'm ready." Carlos's testimony yesterday was incredibly powerful. When he described how David manipulated and threatened family members to maintain control over his organization, I could see the jury's reaction. They understood that this wasn't just about money laundering. It was about a systematic pattern of intimidation and abuse. Jack nodded. Over the past 3 months, he had watched both Emily and Carlos transform from victims of David Rodriguez's manipulation into powerful advocates for justice. Carlos's decision to cooperate fully with federal authorities had provided prosecutors with an unprecedented inside view of the Rodriguez organization, revealing connections and criminal activities that went far beyond what Emily's financial records had shown. "Any word on how Carlos is doing?" Jack asked. Emily's expression softened. "He's doing well, considering everything. The Witness Protection Program has relocated him and his sister's family to a safe location, and he's been working with a therapist to deal with the trauma of being controlled by his brother for so many years. It's going to be a long healing process for him, but at least he's free now." The door to the waiting room opened and Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen entered with a confident smile. "Emily, Jack, are you ready for this? The defense has indicated they want to enter a plea agreement, but we want to proceed with your testimony anyway, to ensure the complete story gets told in open court." Emily took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm ready." As they walked toward the courtroom, Jack reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. What had started as a simple act of kindness, picking up a hitchhiker on a lonely highway, had evolved into something much more significant. It had become a testament to the power of ordinary people to stand up against corruption and violence, to the importance of never giving up on doing the right thing, even when the cost seemed too high to bear. The courtroom was packed with reporters, law enforcement officials, and family members of victims whose cases had been connected to David Rodriguez's organization through Carlos's testimony. As Emily took the witness stand, Jack could see her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was strong and clear as she began to tell her story. For 2 hours, Emily recounted her relationship with David Rodriguez, her gradual realization of his criminal activities, and her decision to gather evidence and flee rather than become complicit in crimes that hurt innocent people. She described the terror of being hunted across state lines, the kindness of a stranger who had risked his own safety to help her, and the courage it had taken to trust law enforcement with evidence that could have gotten her eliminated if it had fallen into the wrong hands. When Emily finished her testimony, Jack could see David Rodriguez slumped in his chair at the defense table. The man who had once seemed so powerful and intimidating now looked small and defeated, confronted with the undeniable evidence of his crimes and the courage of the people he had tried to silence. Judge Martinez sentenced David Rodriguez to 25 years in federal prison on charges including money laundering, racketeering, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. Several of his associates received similar sentences, effectively dismantling an organization that had operated with impunity for over a decade. Outside the courthouse, Emily and Jack stood together on the steps, both feeling the weight of the moment. The media attention was intense, but they had agreed to give a brief statement about the importance of ordinary citizens standing up against criminal organizations. "I want people to understand," Emily said to the assembled reporters, "that you don't have to be a law enforcement officer or a government official to make a difference in fighting corruption. Sometimes it just takes one person willing to do the right thing, even when it's dangerous, even when it's scary," Jack added. "And sometimes it takes recognizing that we're all connected, that helping a stranger in need isn't just about kindness. It's about building the kind of world we want to live in." After the press conference, Emily and Jack walked to a quiet cafe nearby. Over coffee, they talked about their plans for the future. Emily had decided to use her experience to work with organizations that helped people escape abusive situations, while Jack was considering retiring from long-haul trucking to spend more time with the extended family he had reconnected with during the trial proceedings. "You know," Emily said, stirring sugar into her coffee, "I never properly thanked you for what you did. You saved my life, Jack. But more than that, you helped me find the courage to save myself." Jack smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "You had that courage all along, Emily. You just needed someone to remind you it was there." As the sun set over Albuquerque, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Jack and Emily parted ways with the knowledge that their lives had been forever changed by their brief but intense journey together. Emily was returning to a new life built on her own terms, while Jack was heading home with a renewed appreciation for the power of human connection and the difference that one person can make in another's life. 6 months later, Jack received a postcard from Emily. The front showed a beautiful sunrise over the mountains, and on the back she had written, "Jack, I wanted you to know that I'm doing well. I'm working with an organization that helps trafficking victims rebuild their lives, and every day I get to see people find their courage the way you helped me find mine. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the most important journeys begin when a stranger decides to stop and help. The road ahead is bright. Emily." Jack tucked the postcard into his visor, right next to the photos of landscapes he had collected over the years. As he started his truck and pulled onto the highway for another delivery, he reflected on the truth Emily had written. Life was indeed a journey, and the most meaningful moments often came from the unexpected encounters with fellow travelers who needed help finding their way. The road stretched out before him, familiar and welcoming, carrying with it the promise of new adventures and the possibility that around the next curve, someone else might need a reminder that they weren't traveling alone. Fim da Historia. Dear listeners, we hope that Jack and Emily's incredible journey has moved you as much as it moved us. This story reminds us that heroism isn't found in grand gestures, but in the simple decision to help a fellow human being in need. Like Jack, we all have the power to change someone's life through acts of kindness and courage. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us what city you're watching from and share your own stories of unexpected kindness. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of human nature and the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. Don't miss our upcoming content, where ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances and discover strength they never knew they possessed. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories that remind us of our shared humanity. We're waiting for you in the comments section. Join our community of story lovers who believe in the power of hope, courage, and second chances.